Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today I want to talk a little bit about handmade crankbaits, custom made cranks. I get a lot of questions on a pretty regular basis from people asking me whether or not I feel like the high price is worth the bait, meaning a lot of these handmade crankbaits are going to cost anywhere from $20 to $50 each. And from that standpoint, they can be very expensive. Now, when you're asking me this, I'm a tackle junkie, so I like to have a little bit of everything. But when we break it down, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Now, the first thing I want to point out, yes, you're paying a high dollar, $20 to $50, but at the same time, even some of your high dollar mass produced baits are going to be over $20 a pop these days. So a handmade object for $20 isn't necessarily all that much when you start comparing it to what else is mass produced on the market. But the first thing is they are handmade. So it does take an individual quite a bit of time to whittle these down, whether they do it by hand, whether they do it on a wood lathe, whether they make a mold and they're pouring resin. The point is, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into making these baits. So, from that standpoint, if somebody puts 3 hours worth of work into this and they sell it for $20, that's $7 an hour is what they're getting paid to make this. So, you got to kind of look at it from that standpoint as well. The next thing, though, is you are getting a crankbait that is pretty much one of a kind. Yes, there can be a lot more of these made, but the reality is because they're handmade, because they're a lot of times made out of wood, you're talking about crankbaits that are not going to be 100% the same if you bought three of them from the same bait maker. There could be a little difference in the wood. There could be a little difference in how they went about and made it, very minute differences that could have a pretty big impact on the bait. Now, if you happen to have one that runs great, that the fish respond to great, that one of a kind bait, in my opinion, is worth that investment very much. Another thing is a lot of them, like I said, are made out of wood. It is becoming much more difficult to find wood cranks these days. There are definitely some makers that are making them, when I say makers, more of a mass produced version. But overall, if you're looking for wood crankbaits, a lot of times you got to go to the custom makers because they're the ones that are doing it. Now, for me, I do really like wood crankbaits because they tend to be quieter. Now, even if I don't have rattles in this, even if I, don't buy one where a custom maker inserted some uh, weight transfer system or some rattles in it, I like them because they tend to be quieter, meaning when my hooks hit the bait, it's hitting the wood, which doesn't create a high pitched sound the same way a plastic bait does. Now, I'm not saying you don't want that some of the time. I'm saying I like to have the option of a much quieter running bait. If I'm fishing very clear water, I'm fishing really cold conditions, a lot of times that's what I want is a quieter bait, and wood gives me that option. And my custom bait makers, a lot of times, are the ones giving me the option to buy wood. So that's something that you want to keep in mind as well. The other thing is, a lot of times, your custom bait makers hand test every bait. So they'll make it, they finish it, they paint it, then they take it to their test pond or they take it to a lake and they make sure that everyone runs right. So you do know a lot of times when you're buying it, at least from a reputable custom bait maker, that this bait's been tested. And from that standpoint, you don't have to worry about it not running right or even tuning it when you get it. I can't necessarily always say the same about all of the mass produced baits. I have gotten some before that had bills that were molded in improperly. Like you could not even tune it to get it to run right. And that's just because they're making hundreds of thousands of those and they can't hand test everyone. So having the ability to buy a bait that you know has been tested and runs appropriately is great. So those are all really good reasons to go the route of buying a custom bait. Now, I will say there are some things that I don't necessarily like about it. One is what I mentioned before regarding, if you have two baits made, they don't necessarily always run the same. When you're talking about different pieces of wood, you're talking about something that's been handmade, that could potentially lead to differences in the baits. So it is a concern when you buy one and you get it and it runs one way, and you buy a second one and it runs a little bit different. You don't necessarily get that with the mass produced baits generally if they were all done, the exact same way out of the same mold. So you do have more discrepancies between the same bait with the custom ones. That's something that is not a great thing. And a lot of times that's out of the control of the bait maker, even like I said, based on the wood. Now, another issue that I don't necessarily like a lot of times with your wood baits is you do run into some faulty wood. I personally think these break more, that they have more faulty spots in them than a lot of your production molded baits. I've got one here. This is the same bait. This is one where the tip broke, and it's not necessarily, I feel like there was anything wrong with the bait itself. But when I look at the wood, it looks like there was a little bit of like a little knotted piece there, and therefore the wood probably just gave way. So from that standpoint, I don't necessarily blame the bait maker, but it is a wood bait and it had a weak spot. So anytime you're talking about carving a piece of wood, if there's a bad spot of wood there, that bait could potentially falter. The other thing is, if I happen to make a bad cast, say I hit a riprap bank, or I cast against a bridge piling, or I hit a dock post, these do tend to break more a lot of times than other mass produced harder plastic baits. So you could put more into one of these and they don't necessarily last quite as long. So that's a concern as well. The last thing is, if I'm fishing a tournament and I get on them really good with those, I don't necessarily have another way to get one a lot of times. They're not easy to find, they're not easy to get your hands on. So, depending on how you need it, that can be a plus or a minus. It's great when I have them because chances are other people don't have them, and therefore I'm fishing with a bait that might give me an advantage because I'm the only one using it. But it also means if I lose it or I break one, I'm probably not getting another one, at least not in time for that tournament. So I can't sit here and say whether or not it's worth the investment to buy a custom bait. I love having them, but I also feel like it's not something that you absolutely have to have. But I do think there's definitely advantages. There are also some disadvantages. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys to decide if you want to go down the route of custom crankbaits. I will tell you, it can be addicting. So if you go down it, you might find yourself dropping quite a bit of money doing it. But they are pretty cool baits to have. A lot of times you get really awesome custom paint jobs as well, that can separate it from something that's mass produced. But I love them. I'm going to keep throwing them. I'll keep buying some as well, but I'm also buying a lot of the mass produced baits as well. So anyways, let me know in the comment section. Do you guys love the custom baits? Do you think they're overpriced? Put it in the comment section. If you've got some that you love that you want to share with other people, throw it out there. I'll probably end up buying a couple from that bait maker as well. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned. New video coming out tomorrow.